Welcome to Smiles and Cents, where we talk dentistry, money, business, and life outside the chair. I'm Ian with Dental Wealth Partners, and as a reminder, this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and not to be taken as investment advice. With that, let's get started. As we all know, dentistry is a team sport. Some people may not know that, but today we got a special guest on, Tyson Lee, former quarterback for SEC school, and now working in dentistry at Bates Orthodontics. And so we'll just go ahead and jump into it. Tyson, thanks for coming on the show.
Ian, so glad to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, of course, man. So I'm going to give everyone a little bit of a background on you, and then obviously I'll ask you some more questions on it. But so you're not a dentist, a little bit more unique. And then you have a constant history and resume of leadership. And that's kind of what landed you at Bates. But so grew up in Mississippi, you're a Hall of Famer at a local junior college here, played quarterback at Mississippi State 2008, 2009, went to the Rams organization for a little bit, and then you were specific to helping some alumni at Mississippi State find their identities, and then you went on to become a principal, and there's just this, and then I think I even saw that you co-founded a cinnamon roll business with you and your wife. Like there's just all these different ebbs and flows of leadership and then entrepreneurism and now you're at Bates. So really excited to jump into this, how a dental practice can have leadership and then hear more about your story. So tell me throughout that process, Tyson, just tell me, like, big question for the day would be, are you a born leader or do you develop into one?
I once heard somebody say that every leader that has ever been effective was once born. So I joke and say I think it's both.
That's good.
As far back as I can remember, I think all of us have our own stories, and our stories of origin from birth up until where we are currently always has a formational component, right? Like what you had or what you did not have, the people who were in your life or who weren't in your life. And so as I look back on kind of my childhood into young adulthood, I think one of the interests that I always had was leadership. And part of that was because my background. My dad was not in my life a ton growing up. And so I think the absence of leadership was what taught me the importance of leadership. And so I think from a young age, realizing that if leaders don't lead, if they don't step into the difficult situations, if they're not willing to suffer for the good of others, or if they're not willing to do the hard thing for the good of others, there's lifelong effects and there's also immediate impact. And so I think my backstory spoke to that early on. And I would not have been able to articulate that as a young boy or even maybe a young man, but over time, the more that I look back, the more I realized that leadership was something that was important to me because I saw the effects of leaders not leading well.
That's good. Yeah. So you kind of saw the void of what leadership looks like and kind of stepped into that role. So, as you're like kind of going backwards and probably just, obviously you played quarterback. So there's a certain level in which you had to lead in the huddle. You had to lead your teammates. And I've heard you speak several times on what that looks like, but just for the people that don't know your story, tell us just kind of like what stepping into leadership looked like for you
I would
as
first
an individual.
Say, leadership is only leadership if people are following, right? I think it's a concept that is talked about a lot or even read about a lot. But I think I'll get to your question in a second, but I think one of the critical points for me was realizing that leadership is only important if there are people following. And so I began to think of leadership from a follower's perspective, right? Like what I mean by that is if I'm leading someone or if I'm leading a team, one way I know if I'm doing well or not is how are my followers doing? Are they willing to do what I ask? Are they willing to lean into something with me? How are they responding to my words or my behaviors? And so I'll get to the football in a second, but I think that was a critical moment for me when I began to think about leadership in relation to those that I'm leading are followers, because many times we think of leadership as this solo endeavor, but I believe leadership is a team sport. Leadership is collaborative. And when I go back to the football days,
Hmm.
I was obviously the one who was the quarterback calling the plays. I was obviously the one who was making the audibles at the line. So there had to be clarity on what we were doing. There had to be clarity on roles. There had to be a shared understanding of language. But when it came to making the call or running the play, it began with me and ended with me. And I think early on, I had to adapt the reality that I'm only as good as those around me. And so I need to ensure that everybody who is on the team with me,
Hmm.
we're all working towards the same goal. And if things are going well, I needed to make sure that the other 10 players on the field knew that I saw what they were doing. And when things didn't go well, I needed to have the humility to look at the mirror and say, well, that was on me. And so I think, again, through sports, realized early on, you're only as good as those around you. And when things aren't going well, it's so easy to cast blame, make excuses, but being willing to say, no, that was on me. What that did for the team was create buy-in, create trust, and I think it made us more effective. So, yeah, to answer the question, I think the football field taught me a lot about sacrifice and teamwork, but really the need to own things when they went well, but really to own things when they didn't go well was probably one of the most important skills that I learned early on.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, that's a phenomenal perspective too to understand. Hey, leadership isn't just, hey, I'm out front, I'm telling you guys what to do. It's how well are my followers, walking with me. And I think you even mentioned like there's almost like a litmus test to that, right? Like, are they responding? Are they doing the things that I need them to do for us to move in the direction we're moving? And then I heard a lot of ownership on your end where it's like, hey, if things go bad, that's on me. But if we're succeeding,
Absolutely.
I'm not going to take all of the glory
And I think
there.
that
I'm going
litmus
to push it
test
out to
is
people.
exactly
Yeah.
where early on I began to, and this goes back to my story, right? Leadership is often seen through the eyes of the leader,
Mm.
but I think we should consider leadership through the eyes of the follower. And what I mean by that is it's easy for me to be in the position of leadership to tell you how things are going, but the best way, most effective, maybe even the most clear way to know how someone is leading is to ask those whom they lead. And so the litmus test is definitely,
Mm.
where are the followers? How long have they been on the journey? Are they wanting to remain on the journey? Are they getting off the journey? Uh, how much do they trust the leader? And so that's probably been one of the paradigm shifts for me in leadership is leadership is not what I say, but it's definitely what those around me or those that I'm leading say about me. And I have to be humble enough to hear the truth. And if I thought I was communicating well, which often happens, but my followers tell me that I wasn't, I need to be humble enough to say, well, they know more than I do, so maybe I should change some of the things that I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean that's a really different perspective there. That's really interesting, and I love it. But I'm just thinking as you're saying this, I'm trying to think like, okay, how does that practically get implemented? And I would imagine there's some like some layers that are done even before that because I'm thinking, hey, if you're an employer, if you're the dentist running the practice and you go to your staff and say, hey, tell me what you think about me as a leader, and they say, I don't really like you, it's
Yeah,
not going
right.
good, you're just like, okay, you're canned, get out, right? Like tell me, like let's kind of go into Bates, like, and I know your role
Hmm.
is probably a little bit more complex, but how does these types of things actually get implemented,
Great
and how
question.
would you
Well,
recommend
I'm a
going
Patrick
about that?
Lencioni fan, the five dysfunctions of a team, and some of the work that he's created. So
Hmm.
trust is crucial. And so any organization, any team has to spend the time developing the trust through relationships. There is no way around that. You can't shortcut it. You must go straight through it. And that comes with time. It comes with communication. But there really are 5 questions that I think every business, every team, every leader needs to ask, but also be able to answer. So practically, who are you? And that's the core value, core mission, vision of the business. And it needs to be clear. Everybody needs to be able to answer that. And also in the who are you, that's what makes your
Mm,
business here at Bates Orthodontics, what makes us different, what are our differentiating factors from the orthodontic office down the street. And so if we don't know what those are, it's really hard for us to market ourselves. It's really hard for us to lean into who we are. So the first one is who are you? The second one is where are you? And the where are you is very much gaining feedback, but really just living in reality. Where are we financially? Where are we when it comes to people being kind of right person, right seat? Where are we when it comes to the market? Where are we when it comes to the cadence of meetings and communication? So who are you? Where are you? The third is where do we want to go? And I often say that's the vision component. And one of my favorite quotes, and I don't know
mm,
who said it, but a vision without a plan is just a wish. And that's always been helpful for me because it's so easy to say where I
mm,
want to go. And so we'll go to the fourth one in a second, but where do we want to go? It's making sure that our team knows who we are, where we are, but where are we going? Nobody wants to follow someone who isn't
mm,
consistent and clear on the direction where we're going. And if that changes a lot, and it's not that business doesn't need a pivot, and it's not that there aren't, constraints that require creativity, but people need to know that you are who you say you are, you're doing what you said you would do. And so the third one is where are you going? The fourth is how will we get there? And that's where it's go ahead.
yeah. Hey, before you jump into the fourth, Tyson, I think that's really important. That I want to just kind of piggyback on that third one. I think that's so often missed, especially in a dental practice. It's kind of like, hey, here's who we are. We're, an orthodontic practice. Here's where we are and what's going on. But then there's not an
That's
expressed
good.
vision of, hey, here's where we're going. Um, yeah, I think that's really important. And I think that's, understated so often. How do you communicate that, from that perspective? What does that practically look like? Is that like, hey, we're gonna have a team huddle and we're gonna
That's a great
discuss that
question.
as these
And
quarterly
feel free
meetings?
to
What does
ask
that look like?
anything that's not practical enough, please come back to me and I'll make it more practical. I think it's a few things. One, I think it needs to be written down. I think
Yeah, of
there needs
course.
to be 5 year, 3 year, 1 year pictures, goals, ideas, and depending on the language that you prefer to use, that's up to you. But there needs to be some form of a target. There needs to be some form of a playbook that says, hey,
Mhm,
5 years from now, 3 years from now, a year from now, here's where we want to be. And that's both personnel, that's both kind of the finance piece, geographically, if we want to move into another office, do we want to continue to lease? Do we want to buy? Do we want to bring on another orthodontist? Do we want to bring on another assistant? So really just clarifying a lot of where do we want to go and becoming as or being as particular as you can, right? Based on your current location or your current practice,
mhm,
spending the time. And in one of the reasons I think this is overlooked is it does seem non-productive because it requires a lot of time just to put these things on paper. And Dr. Bates, who I worked for,
mhm,
the reality is whenever people aren't in the chair, you're losing money. And I put that in open quotes. But the reality is time spent doing something really well on the front end affords you high profitability on the back end because you know exactly where you're going, you know exactly what you want.
mhm.
You're not spending time in the future trying to redirect or correct because you spent the right time knowing where you want to go. But when it comes to the meeting cadence, so I'll just say yes, spending time determining where is it that we want to go, but doing that with the team. Teams don't want to hear you tell them what you're going to do, they want to feel part of it. There needs to be buy-in. And so whether that's, a
Mm,
weekly lunch or a monthly lunch, depending on, the cadence or the meeting cadence of a practice, you may need to say for the next 4 to 6 weeks, we're going to talk about our core values. We're going to talk about where we want to go, because if you believe leadership is a team sport, you've got to get people on board. You've got to get them moving in that direction. And then once
yeah.
you've kind of communicated that,
Yeah.
then all of a sudden in your weekly cadence, here we have a morning huddle, and then we have kind of a bi-weekly team meeting. And in that, you want to keep going back to the core values, but you also want to make sure that you're communicating consistently to the team. Hey, here's where we said we're going. Here's where we're going. And then in the second, we'll talk about how to get there, but just spending time making sure in your meetings, whatever that cadence is, that everybody is on the same page.
That's good. That's good because it's just it seems like it's a constant action because even when we're talking about this, I would imagine the one or two practices, maybe there's more, but the low percentage of practices that are writing down their vision, they're writing down where they're at, and then they're writing down where their vision is and where they're going. I'd imagine a lot of them just have it in a document. And it's not a constant action of, hey, we're talking about this, we're
No,
collaborating
that's
on
good,
this.
Ian. And
That
I
that's
would
so good.
say
Yeah.
Dr.
So please
Bates has been
continue.
wonderful to work with and to work for. And what we've talked a lot about is, if the vision, mission, the core values, however you want to communicate those, what are your differentiating factors? If they're not lived, then they're not really helpful. And so what we realized was, often
Hmm.
small businesses, particularly orthodontic practices, and I would say dental practices as well, you have, a handbook, or you have a document or two that people read when they came on board, but it's not constantly reviewed. People aren't onboarded with it. They're not rewarded because they live these core values out. And so I think it takes what you're saying, intentionality, to make sure that we are using the core values or whatever we've deemed the purpose of the practice, but we're finding ways to bring it into the life of the practice so that it's not this distant document that nobody talks about.
Mm, yeah, that's good because most people they do that and they put it on the shelf and then it's
Exactly.
forgotten about. There's no incentives based on it. And if you ask the owner, they would. I've asked a couple owners like, hey, what are your core values? And
Oh,
they forget. They
we
say,
just went through,
I'll have
we've
to look
spent
at
the
the
last really
document.
3
So
months clarifying those and articulating those to make sure that this is who we are and this is who we want to be. And one of the ways we try to spill that over into the culture is, making sure in our morning meetings we're bringing a core value in occasionally, or in our conversations we're highlighting someone who is living that core value out. That way people see it as not just this distant document or kind of a stagnant part of who we are, but we're trying to make sure that it's slowly moving down into the culture on our team. And the only way to do that is when other people on the team start using the language, and other people on the team are realizing, okay,
mm,
here's what this core value looks like. So, for example, whenever we developed kind of a culture document, we call it the bow tie culture, because Dr. Bates and another partner here who works with him, Dr. Phillips, part of the brand is bow ties. So we call it the bow tie culture. But what we wanted to do was, okay, if these
come
are
on.
our core values, how are they expressed? How are they operationalized? What are the behaviors that are associated with it? So, for example, ownership, that's one of our core values. Well, if we leave ownership as a core value only, and we let every individual define ownership in the way that they think it should be defined, the collaboration piece and the cohesive piece is not going to be there, right? So we spent time, and ownership looks like this, in
Hmm.
giving examples, or in our practice, hey, ownership is defining it, but then talking through for the admin role, for the clinic role, or for the treatment coordinator role, what does ownership look like in your role versus this umbrella topic of ownership, but nobody really knows what are the behaviors associated with that. And how do I know if I'm actually living into the core value that we've talked about? And maybe the last thing I'll say here, and feel free to ask questions. I've realized that one of the parts that gets missed is the word, the phrase, the concept. How do you move that into the behavior of people? Therefore, it becomes the behaviors in the practice. And I think you have to spend time helping people understand, hey, this is what this looks like day to day here. And that is something that then becomes part of the conversation. You can get feedback, people can ask questions, but it's not just a word. It actually has measurable behaviors that you can talk about.
That is really that's really unique. The measurable behaviors behind the actual words in the value system. That's great. That's great. So I know you kind of forwarded to number
Yeah.
four.
So, number
I'd
one,
love to
who are
hear
you?
four and
Two,
five.
where are you? Number three, where do you want to go? Number four is how will you get there? And what I have, I'm grateful to Dr. Bates and admire his willingness to grow and to lean in. But what he and I found in the small business world, and particularly in dentistry, it's the how will you get there is a lot about execution. And small business owners, or we'll say dentists, orthodontists, they have so much on their plate that they don't have the capacity to execute on the plans that they've developed, right? They may have ideas, they may have strategies, not all do, right? So, what's the 5 year, 3 year, 1 year? And then, even in the 1 year, we try to break that down into quarters, right? Kind of the sports world, that's where I come from. And so, what are we trying to do in the first quarter? And how does that align with what we're trying to do in the next 3 years or the next 5 years? But he just didn't have the capacity to do all that he wanted to do. And I think Dr. Bates would tell you he loves being an orthodontist. He's excellent at it. He loves running a business, but he needed help. He knew that he couldn't do it all himself. And there are things that he
Hmm.
does extremely well. But because leadership is a team sport, having the humility and self awareness to know, hey, actually, this is a portion of the business that I don't know that I do as well as somebody else does. So let me bring somebody in to help me. And the how will you get there piece is very much what are our weekly goals? What are our monthly goals? What are our quarterly goals? And how are we ensuring that we're getting there? And I just know that balls get dropped or things don't get executed on time. A lot of in a lot of situations because everybody is at capacity, there is no margin. And so putting in a plan of how you will actually
Hmm.
get there has been a real critical piece for what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean that's really good. That's so what I'm thinking about when you're saying all of that is kind of like, okay, I'm imagining there's, hey, here's a long-term annual goal or quarterly goal, and you're breaking it down into key performance indicators for each
That's
day, these
exactly right.
inputs to an extent. And then are you doing that? Are you taking that and making it positional inputs as well, where it's like, hey, Dr. Bates has to see this many new patients, and because he needs to do that, here's what we expect from the
That's
ortho
very good. Yeah.
assistant
So we have
and
like
so on
an
and so
internal
forth.
scoreboard. And the
Okay.
scoreboards are very much about kind of those lead indicators versus the lag indicators. You spoke to KPIs and inputs, and we have tried to
Mm-hmm.
really focus on the inputs because in our world, you may have a good month and you don't necessarily know what caused it. You may have a bad month and you can, like August and September and a lot of practices are difficult because school is starting and all of that. And so what we did not want to do was to just look at the production, just look at the revenue and say, oh, wow, we're doing really well. And then when things are going down, we start to panic. So developing a scoreboard that said, okay, what are the
Mm-hmm.
5 to 10 behaviors that we want our TCs, admin, or clinic assistants to be focusing on, trusting that if we focus on those, the product, the outcome will come. And so spending time determining, okay, what do we want for each of these positions? each of these roles to focus on. And that took time too,
Mm-hmm.
right? It took time to determine, okay, how do we want
Yeah.
for our patient coordinators to spend their day? If we could, if we had a pie chart and we said, here are the behaviors, inputs that we know get us to our end goal of treating patients and being a successful business, let's figure out what are the inputs that they need to be doing to get us there. And then we did that for orthodontists, for my role, for the admin or the patient coordinators, for the clinical assistants, and then lastly for the treatment coordinators. And that was our way of developing a scoreboard where we could say, okay, uh, we're doing well because we're doing this, or last week wasn't a good week because we failed in these certain areas. Let's pick it back up and try again this week.
Mm, that's good. So, and then with that scoreboard, is
Yes,
that
please.
something like I'm just trying to like practically think through, is that is that something that like is privy to the owners and you and kind of higher up management, or is that, hey, everyone sees this collaborative effort, this is posted on, the
Great
break
question.
room or
So I
wherever it
have a
may be?
practice manager who's
What does that look
incredible.
like?
And part of it is, again, how do you operationalize these things? How do these things become systematic, but also simple? And so it's collaborative. It's in our patient coordinator meetings, in our clinical assistant meetings, and in our treatment coordinator meetings. These numbers, this scoreboard is talked about. And it's very much a, hey, here are the behaviors that we want to focus on. And so our practice manager, and I work alongside her to help her. We're just now rolling this out. So we recently completed our kind of scoreboard at the executive level. And this is also assuming that we know the numbers or the KPIs that we've been tracking. And now we're going to each of the smaller teams and say, hey, here are the numbers that we want to track. Are we missing any? There again, the collaborative side. Hey, we've been tracking these KPIs for the last year or 3 years. We want to make sure we're focusing on the right ones. And then our practice manager takes that scoreboard into the meetings and she's just asking them, hey, how are we doing? And she's holding them accountable to those
Hmm.
numbers. And she is communicating with me and with our doctors. How are we doing? So it's both collaborative, meaning we want to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that we're tracking the right things, but it's also individual and bottom up because we're hoping that each person who is in their position are doing the very things that we need for them to do that collectively makes the team better. Does that make sense? And I'm happy to go. I want to make sure that this is serving the audience well. So feel free to double click on something if not.
That's perfect. That makes sense. I think there's probably a few sub questions that I want to ask before we move on. And I think the first would be, you talked about kind of your values and things of that nature. I
Yep.
would imagine in the scoreboard, obviously you have to make money, right? And that's kind of like, hey, no one gets paid if we don't do well, we make money. So there's going to be some components of just the orthodontic dentistry side of things of here's how we all succeed financially. But then within that scoreboard, how many of those metrics are just based around culture and leadership? And then how does that actually affect the scoreboard or the weighting for an individual and their, hey, are they going to be promoted? Are they going to
That's a
be
great
let
question. So
go?
part of
Like
the way we
those types of
evaluate are
things.
based on our 5 core values, but we also evaluate, promote based on how they're doing in their particular role. So we've spent time determining, going back to maybe the who are you, where are you, what is your role? So if we want to think about sports, each position has particular skills needed for that role. And we define, hey, here is your role and here is what we expect in your role, because we can't really have a scoreboard if we haven't defined what your role is, right? Because I can't give you numbers
Right.
or I can't give you things to track if you don't know exactly what your role is. So for, treatment coordinator, it could be anything from the number of calls you make to how long after the meeting do they hear from you to conversion rates, right? We track all of these. And so if the conversion rate is lower than what we want or what the standard is. We may give some coaching for them. We may send them to a
Hmm.
training. Go ahead. Does that help?
So question. Yeah, no, that's phenomenal. So within that, I'm just thinking like I've seen practices do this several different ways. Is this a pen and paper, Excel spreadsheet, practice management software like Dental Intel or
We
Practice
have
by
our
Numbers?
own kind
How
of
are you
internal
tracking
sheet. So
this?
we use Google Documents, and all it is we have our five core values, and then
Okay.
we use some of. There's an organization called EOS, an Entrepreneur Operating System. We don't use all of that, but there are
Yeah.
elements of it that I have found to be really helpful. And so for us, we think about, okay, what are the five core values that we have? That's part of hopefully our culture. So we want to see those things lived
Hmm.
out in your day to day. But then we also, in developing kind of our positions and making sure that people understood what their role consisted of, we've really communicated that specifically. Hey, here are the particular duties and responsibilities that you have in your role. And once those are defined, then we're able to say, okay, five core values, here's your role, and how are you doing in that role? Because we wanted to make it simple. We haven't wanted to make it
Hmm.
elaborate because at the end of the day, if you're living out our five core values and we have given you your role and you've agreed to it, we just want to be able to make sure that you're continuing to grow. And so that's just an internal document that we have created that we use, and we'll be rolling that out to our team in the coming weeks.
Okay. That's really interesting. So it sounds like the somewhat of the leadership on your guys' side is, hey, we want the right people, and as long as they are running on our values, we are okay for whatever their production is. Like in theory, if and I'm not saying this would be the case, but in theory, I have a really slow, you know, ortho assistant or something of that nature, but they're a rock star when it comes to all the values. In this situation for you guys, you're saying, hey, they're still on the team. They're doing everything that we're asking them to, and we're going to help coach them on getting better
That would be the hope, right? So I
technically
would
from a
say
skills. Is that the
core
right phrase?
values are kind of a prereq, assuming that you are on our team if you have these core
Mm-hmm.
values. The core values don't necessarily make you money, and core values don't make you good at your job. So there's this, you can call it a character component, but then there's a competence component that I'm saying is you have to be able to do your job as an assistant or as a patient coordinator or as a treatment coordinator. And there are particular numbers and particular skills that we need to see in those roles. And so we want to see you lifting out the core
Mm-hmm.
values, but we also want to see that you are able to do the role that we've hired you to do. And if there's ever a point to where we think, oh, wow, you are living our core values, but you're not a good fit for this role, we want to have the honest, ongoing conversations. We hopefully can find you another place on the team, but we need to be willing to lean in and have the hard conversations and help somebody grow. But what we found was a lot of times when
Mm-hmm.
people weren't performing well, it was too subjective. So we wanted to figure out, okay, what is it that we want to see? And if we're not seeing that, then we can lean in and help you. So I don't want it to come across as core values are the only thing. That's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is, are you capable of doing the job that we've given to you? And if so, wonderful. Let's give you more duties and responsibilities. But if you're not, that might mean we haven't done a good enough job communicating the role. It might mean that we need to invest some more time or
Mm-hmm.
training into you. Or lastly, it might just mean wonderful person, fits all the core values, but you're just not a fit for our team. And those are the hard conversations where you have to then say,
Mm-hmm.
Ian, we've loved having you. You embody all of our core values, but hopefully with those ongoing conversations, it's clear that you're not able to do the job that we need for you to do.
Mm-hmm. I really like that. I like how the structure, even in the thought process, is hey, what can we own on our end versus what is
100%.
ownable on their end, right? It's going through, yeah, it just the did I clearly define what they're supposed to do, their KPIs, their inputs? How can I help better train them? And then the last
Yeah,
thought
and most
process
of the
is like, okay,
time,
maybe this isn't
Ken,
working
is,
out,
and
right?
I can speak personally,
Love that.
it's cowardly to just let someone go without giving them a chance to grow. And I have unfortunately done that
Mm,
and been there. And one of the reasons ownership is a core value is if I have not given you a clear job with clear responsibilities and clear duties, it's wrong of me to expect for you to know what to do. And I think that's what can happen in dentist offices,
hmm.
orthodontic offices, is the job is so unclear that ambiguity is just, it's been there for so long that you then get frustrated with someone. But it's on me, it's on the leaders to determine, hey, I need to give you clarity. And once I've given you clarity, then I can hold you accountable to it. But I think more often than not, and again, this is me saying that I've done it, I haven't given the clarity. And because I haven't given the clarity, my team members don't know what I
Hmm.
expect and they don't know how they're doing. And that's not fair to them. So I have to spend the time making sure that I've communicated clearly what I expect. And then I can walk them through it. Then we can have honest conversations. But without the clarity, it's not loving them or serving them well.
Yeah, that's really good. I love that. Well, as we're kind of
Yeah,
continuing, what about number
number
5? I'm
five,
assuming this is
the
going to
bow
be
tie. Who
the
will help
bow
you?
tie,
So
as you
who are
will.
you? Where are you? Where are
Yeah.
you going? How will you get there? And the fifth is who will help you. And sometimes that's somebody on your team, and other times you need somebody else to come in and help you. Because if you're stuck, if you keep spinning your wheels,
Hmm.
that often means there's not somebody currently on the team that's helping you get to where you want to go. And so that requires, the business
It's
owners, the
good.
practice owners looking in the mirror and saying, you know what? I have exactly the skill set needed to do this. Or, and this happens too in sports, you just didn't realize that that wide receiver could also play running back. And so you just move them around. So that means you have to know
Hmm.
your people. You have to spend time figuring out, okay, is there somebody else on the team that can really help us get to where we want to go? And then that means you either need to bring in somebody to help you for a short time, or it might mean you need to bring somebody in at somewhat of an executive level or another level to make sure that you can continue doing what you've been doing and the business can continue to operate and flourish for the years to come.
That's really good. Yeah, because I think, and going back to the sports analogy, even a head coach has an offense coordinator, defense coordinator, position coaches. There's very much so a tiered influence that's there. And you
Absolutely.
can only
Yes.
go as far as you can go, but you bring somebody else in and they can add perspective and different feedback, different energy. So I love that. I love that understanding that, hey, sometimes like, we need to go external. We can't just stay in our little bubble.
It
So
is.
that's
And I,
good.
and
And
maybe
it's a humble approach.
the last thing I would say
And as
is
we,
I
yeah.
think Dr. Bates has said this, and I've talked to other dentists, even in consulting opportunities that I've had. I did dentists, orthodontists, uh, figure out what you're good at. What do you want to spend 75 to 80% of your time doing,
Mm-hmm.
and do that? And if you are not spending a majority of your time
Mm,
operating in the skills that you have, you probably need to think about bringing somebody in to help. So that's a plumb line or litmus test is, are you spending 75% of your time in your highest and best use doing what only you can do or what you want to do? Or are you spending time doing things that you should not be doing? And if the answer is you're spending more time doing things you shouldn't, that's when you need to bring in either a consultant to help you get things right, or hiring somebody full time so that you can get back to your highest and best use.
yeah. I mean, that's really good. And I think that, you know, understanding that piece alone is super important. I see a lot of dentists in theory that'll say, hey, I'm not going to have this person like maybe in the starting practice,
Yeah,
right? They'll do hygiene on their own for a while, which is good until they get too busy, and then there's that kind of, hey, I could keep doing hygiene, but if I keep
Yeah.
doing hygiene, I can't see other patients. And so it's a clear, definitive role of like, hey, I need to change to start making more money. But when it comes to the administrative tasks, when it comes to these other things, there's sometimes a block of looking at the cost rather than the value. And just in the difference in the, hey, here's what I'm going to
Mm,
get out of something can really giving up this 25% of my duties or 50% of my duties that's not valuable or not effective or efficient for them to do, and they can outsource to that somebody who they're paying at
absolutely.
a lower rate
And their
potentially
quality
is
of and their quality
really
of life
crucial.
typically improves
So that's
too. And
good.
so I know we don't have a lot of time, but I would just say understand the
Mhm.
season that your business is in, right? Whatever your season is might mean you do need to, for a little bit longer, continue taking on more. But as you grow, or if you're stuck and wanting to grow, sometimes it means that in order for your quality of life to improve, letting go of some of the reins is the best thing you can do. And that's not easy, but I'm confident it's best long term.
Yeah, I mean that's phenomenal. And analogy that I'll tack onto that, when we had our third child, we have four now, but when we had our third child, my wife came to me as I was outside cutting the grass, living my best life, right? She said, "Hey, I think it's time
I
for you to
need you in
hire
the
somebody to
house.
cut the grass." And in my, yeah, and on my side of the fence, I'm like, "No, I need to be doing this. This is part of the man's job. I need
Yeah.
to do the grass, edge it, do it perfectly." And all the while,
Mm,
I'm realizing, hey, I'm not spending as much family time as I could because I'm spending 2 hours a week doing my grass in my yard, which is a good thing. But
yes.
there's a certain level of things that we have to give up to go get what is more important. As we close, and I'll allow you to drill down on this, but if you were to strip down, if you had to strip down aspects of the scorecard or aspects
Mm,
of a team that's going to thrive, what would be the one thing that you'd say, hey, every dentist, every orthodontist, every every just dental professional who's leading an organization, they need
well,
to
that's a
focus
great
on this
question.
one thing. If you could focus on that.
I think clarity. I mean, people, clarity is kindness. Clarity comes in a lot of different forms. It comes in communication. It comes in what am I hired to do? But I think clarity is the job of the leader. I think clarity, and it's very hard because to get clarity often means you have to spend a lot of time in the dark hours that nobody sees to get to the most clear thing that you need to do. But I'm convinced that the people that I lead or the people that I work with, when there's not clarity, there's chaos. When there's chaos, there's confusion. And when there's confusion, that affects the culture. And so making sure that you're clear on who you are, where you want to go, how you'll get there, and who it is that's going to help you. If you have that clarity, you'll at least have peace to know that you're moving forward appropriately. But without clarity, I think it brings on a lot more difficulties than needed.
Hmm. That's phenomenal. I think that's a great place to end. Tyson, as always, always great talking with you. And I know this will bring the listeners a lot of value. And yeah, hopefully we'll have you on again for some more of this leadership skill set and just kind of
Would
practicality of
love to. Thank you so
leading an
much. Oh,
organization
Ian,
like
thank you. And
Bates. So
listeners, thank
again,
you.
thanks, Tyson.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for listening to Smiles and Cents. For more information, resources, and to schedule, visit dentistfinancialplanning.com. This podcast is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered investment, tax, legal, or accounting advice. Any opinions expressed are subject to change and may not reflect the views of affiliated firms. Investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal, and past performance does not guarantee future results. Please consult your financial, tax, and legal professionals regarding your individual situation.